Welcome to another episode of Savor Food and Body. Today we have a returning guest back from season 1. Brianna Campos is back to talk about all things body image, and we're going to put a little spin on it, twist on it today, and talk about picture grief. What does it mean to look at yourself from past pictures, either when you were in a smaller body or a younger body, and how do we sit with that grief of what our body is like today and maybe develop some acceptance around it. So just as a reminder, Brianna, also known as Bri from Body Image with Bri online, is a licensed professional counselor in New Jersey. She has worked with clients in eating disorder recovery for 6+ years and has a special interest in body image. She also taught introduction to eating disorders as an adjunct professor. She's passionate about using health at every size paradigm when it comes to helping clients find freedom with food and peace in their current body. And Bri is passionate about effective supervision and has since taken the New Jersey State Licensure Supervisory course. So cool. She's excited about helping other providers to become confident in their work with body image so that more people can have the help they need in making peace with their body. You can find her on Instagram at Body Image with Bri. She also has a wonderful podcast, which we will put links to in the show notes. And I highly, highly recommend both following the social stuff and the podcast. So Bri, you are truly one of my favorite providers to have learned from and continue to learn from. And so honored to have you on the show with us today.
Thank you so much. Words of affirmation just feed my soul. So thank you for all of that. I appreciate it.
Well, so you, just full disclosure, you put out this wonderful email sequence a handful of weeks ago on picture grief. And I'll just do a plug right here. If listeners are not on Bri's email list yet, that needs to get done before the end of the show, if not immediately following, because she puts out some really great content pretty much every week on your email list. And this series that we're going to talk about today, like I said, came through her email. And so this idea of picture grief, I'm wondering if we can just start with describing what is picture grief. How do you voice that to folks?
Yeah. So the way that I describe picture grief is when you look at a photo and one of two things happens. Either you are grieving a body that you used to have, or that you are looking at a body that, that you wish that you still looked like, right? So looking at a photo of maybe a younger or a smaller or thinner version of yourself and wishing you could still look like that, or looking at a current photo of yourself and grieving the current body that you exist in. And so the way that picture grief sort of came about for me, was how most things come about before they become content, is through lived experience. And I remember looking at photos of my younger self and missing that smaller body. And the thing that really kind of struck me was how much I hated my body then and didn't appreciate that smaller body then. And just thinking like, oh, if I could just have that body now, then I would appreciate it. And I think that's part of the trap of grief that we kind of get tangled in, is that we always think, that we're going to be able to avoid the discomfort of where we are now. And whether you are grieving a body that you used to have, or you're grieving the body that you currently have, what I can tell you is that no matter where you are in that grief cycle, the grass will always be greener. So it'll always be like, oh, but I was so young and agile then. And that seeps into so many different areas of grief as well. But that self-loathing and, I don't know what the word is, but like pining for a younger or a different version of yourself will never actually feel as satisfactory as we think that it will. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. What's coming up for me as you're saying that too is this memories thing too. And you've talked about this a bit too, the memories that you have associated towards what was going on in that picture, or the other memories of what was going on in your life, maybe during that picture. And so I find for, women in midlife, there's a lot of this upheaval that's going on. They're also called the sandwich generation. And so we're dealing with kids, we're dealing with older parents. And so when we also look at those pictures of our past self, not only is it the body image piece, but it's the memories tied with that time of life too, when life felt a little bit more simplified. And so there's that. But we might delve into that a little bit, but I want to back up just a little bit. And like you said, which is so great about your content, a lot of it is coming from lived experience, which I think I just appreciate the authenticity that brings. And so I'm wondering if you can share with us, if it feels comfortable to you, about what thoughts go through your mind as you sit with a picture that maybe you're grieving, or maybe you're in a different place now. It's not so much grief, but you're realizing what life was like then and now how your life is now. I wonder if you can just be the example of what that would look like if you're looking at a picture of yourself.
Absolutely. So actually this came up the other day recently, and I had shared it. Was posting in my stories. I was sharing about going to the doctors and, how I set boundaries with my doctor, 4 years ago. And I shared the live that I had done, and looking at myself at that time, I'm like, wow, like my body has changed so much, even just from that point. And I was still, doing this work. I was still body image with Brie. And I think that the first time I really sat in picture grief as a coach, as a professional, as somebody who helps other people, it was during 2020. And I had done this challenge of like, I'm going to wear the bikini. I'm going to do it. I feel ready. It doesn't feel triggering like maybe the first time I tried to do it, but it felt like a good challenge. And then my goddaughter wanted to take photos with me. And so I didn't even miss a beat. I was like, yeah, sure. It was the first time I looked at that photo. I remember being filled with grief in it. I described grief a little bit like heaviness in my chest, where it's just this sadness of, oh, like that's not what I was expecting. It wasn't what I had imagined in my mind. What I can tell you is that when I look at that same photo now, as I use it often as a point of reference of what grief feels like, especially through picture grief, it has lost its heaviness, so to speak. That the more I have normalized seeing this photo, it has less weight, no pun intended. Like it weighs heavy. It weighs less heavy on my soul. And I attribute that to 3 reasons. One, I think that part of what happens is when we look at a photo of ourselves and we expect to see something that's not there, our expectation is skewed. Then what happens is there is a judgment that comes in, and that is the judgment that then triggers the feelings that are associated with it. So I can look at a photo of myself nowadays and not like how my body looks, and it no longer is attached to distress because I've been able to separate it out. That I can look at a photo and be like, yeah, that's just not a great angle of me. Like that was taken by my nephew. That was just not a great shot. Or that was taken by my dad, and like definitely not a great shot. Coming from my nephew. But that if you remember from the training that we did together with body image, I break body image up into 4 aspects. So I break it up not just in perception, which is often where people get most stuck, but it's your perception, your affect, your beliefs, and your behaviors. And so when you break all of those down, I can now look at a picture of myself and not like how I look, but it doesn't impact my affect. It doesn't impact how I feel because it no longer impacts my belief systems. Because I no longer believe, okay, that if I look bad in a photo, that I'm going to end up single and alone, or that if I don't look aesthetically beautiful, that I don't know, that my family is going to judge me. Or if they do judge me, I care less than maybe I did 4 or 5 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love how you brought in those other components of body image too, because we don't look at body image, I don't think, as a culture from that multi-dimensional side of things. We just think about it as, what do I think other people think of my body? What am I perceiving? And particularly when it comes to pictures or reflection in the mirror, it's just my mind's definition, judgment of what I'm seeing reflecting
Correct.
back of me. And so understanding that there's all 4 of those components to unpack and unravel and get to work together when we're talking about body image. So I think it helps kind of normalize, like, that's why it takes a while to work on body image stuff. It's not a one and done. I mean, I can tell someone, like, hey, can we eat more regularly, more variety, more consistently throughout the day? I mean, those are almost like boxes someone can check. Sure. We might have to unpack where some barriers come from in doing those things, but it's not as much nuance and, like, kind of like you said, heavy nuance, uncovering some of this nuance as it is when it comes to body image.
And I think the reason for that too is, like, it's all of the things that go into our beliefs. So, you know, one of the things I talk about with clients and with people who are in supervision with me is, you know, we talk a lot about unlearning diet culture, and we do that from our food, but do we do that from other areas of our life? And I know the more unlearning I have done from diet culture when it comes to my food, the deeper the layer of the onion goes, right? That there's just more and more of, like, okay, so now it's no longer about whether or not eating, you know, chocolate is quote unquote bad, but it's, do I have to earn rest? And if I feel that way, where does that narrative come from? And if I don't have to earn rest, then what are the consequences of resting? Because there's benefits, absolutely, but it comes at a cost. And maybe the cost is that I exist in this larger body, or an quote unquote unshapely body, or an immobile body. So it's just, this is why I call body image like an archaeological dig, because the deeper we go, the deeper we dig, the more there is to uncover.
So walk us through, how would you help someone process picture grief? Like, someone's looking at pictures from their summer vacation or a get together that they recently had, and it looks either they're grieving their current body, what they're seeing in that picture, and or it's not the same look as how they were in last year's summer photos or 3 years ago summer's photos.
So what I would do first and foremost, before even talking about looking at the photos, people need to get in the photos. And I know so many people who don't want to get in the photos. I had asked a client of mine for a testimony on her experience. We'll do a picture grief challenge every year in my community. And the quote she gave me was, I get to be part of the memories again. And that, it just moved me so deeply, because there are pockets of years that I don't have any photographic evidence of, because I didn't want my body to be documented. And so I tell and encourage all of my clients to separate out the pre-taking the photo, taking the photo, and then looking at the photo. And if looking at the photos is the part that is painful or shameful, maybe we don't do that part yet. But that when you're thinking about taking a photo, being a part of the memory, can the motivation be something other than looking like a supermodel or being able to document the hottest body in the world? When you lower the expectation to be like, I just want to have this memory and I want to have it forever. I want to be able to look back at this time and be like, yep, I have a memory that I can show, because other than that, the memory lives in our mind. And then, we could talk a little bit later about that pre-care of like, what do we do before a photo? But then there's this after. And I will tell you that when I had taken those photos, I knew that I probably wasn't going to like them and still chose to look at them. And I don't recommend that. I 10 out of 10 don't recommend that. And so what I would have done if I was coaching me, I would have said, okay, we just did an exposure where we wore a bikini for the first time in our entire life. Our stomach has never seen that much sunlight before. On a scale of 1 to 10, how distressful will looking at these photos be? And if I had been honest with myself at the time, probably would have been pretty high, like a 7 or an 8. So that is why I think I experienced so much shame, or in the shame spiral when looking at those photos, because I anticipated it sucking, but I didn't anticipate it also making me feel badly. Like I was like, I'll be fine. And I do that a lot. I was like, it's fine. And then my internal system's like, no. And what I tell people is this is why body image is trauma. Because even though in your brain, it doesn't make sense that looking at a photo could be traumatic, the reality is our body doesn't lie to us. That distress signal is actually my body attempting to save my life. Now, the problem is it's a little bit like a fire alarm, but there's no fire. Like my body is like, oh no, there's a fire emergency, and is prepping my body for a fire. The way that we can get around that is, rather than go for the thing that's a 7 or an 8, maybe we started at something that's like a 4 or 5. So if looking at the photo of me in a bikini was too triggering, starting by looking at a photo of me fully clothed. And so the way I would encourage a client to do this is I'd literally make my distress tolerance scale on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the most triggering. Where would you put looking at this photo? Okay, that's a 10. Where would you put, what would be like a 5? What would be a 1? What would be easy peasy, no problem? Maybe we start with taking some selfies and looking at the selfie. A lot of people, I think, because of 2020 and because of working virtually, have become accustomed to that Zoom camera lens. It isn't as triggering as it might have been in the beginning of the pandemic. And I believe that is because of the habituation, because we've done it so much. And so I think that starting with something more tangible is the first place I'd start. The second thing I would do is I would get curious. I would lean into some questions, and I usually call this the thought trail versus the spiral. Because what happened was I looked at that photo, it was an activation of an 8, and then I started to go down the spiral of, oh my God, I can't believe I look so big, right? And it just one distressing thought after another and after another and after another. And again, the spiral is another attempt to protect and save the system when it's not actually helpful. It's like panicking where a fire alarm is. It's like, we got to get all this stuff and we have to get out now. It's like, nope. If you have a fire safety plan, then you know exactly what you need to do to get out. And that is what I think starting at that lower number does, is it sets you up for the success of, okay, when I'm beginning to panic, when I'm noticing, when I'm observing, do I have the space? And so some thought trail questions I might ask is, what is the story I'm telling myself? Where do I feel this in my body? What do I need in this current moment? Is there anything that I can do to dissipate some of this distress level? On a scale of 1 to 10, where is this distress? Maybe I thought looking at it, a different picture would be a 4 or a 5, but maybe it's actually closer to a 6. Okay, before I start to spiral, let me ask myself. And it's a lot of this self-dialogue and self-talk in contradiction to the critical voice that is just so innate and so easy for us to fall into.
Mm-hmm. Oh, those steps are really helpful. And I love the idea of looking at pictures of someone's self at varying degrees of difficulty. So like you said, the picture of a bikini may not be as triggering as seeing yourself fully clothed or in pants with a flowy shirt on or something like that, and kind of helping yourself step into the picture grief side of things and learning maybe some of those skills, strengthening that skill set with that less triggering picture, so that when you move into something that's has a little bit more clout to it, it's not as, it could still be distressing, but someone's got the tools to help themselves get out of that stress or distress or move through that distress.
Bingo. And just really quickly, a small tangent. I had shared in my stories, you talked about sharing authentically, and I had shared earlier talking about going to the doctors. So for the first time in 4 years, my doctor brought up weight loss to me. And this was a doctor who was safe. This is a doctor whom I recommended to other people. And a month ago, that would have been beyond distressing. That would have sent me spiraling, or so I thought. But because I had worked out what would I do in the event that this happened, or when this happens, because I knew it eventually might happen. And I came up with a strategy plan of, okay, if this happens, what's never going to help me is pulling out facts and research on health at every step. Like, my doctor's not going to listen to me on that. But what am I skilled at? I am skilled at talking about compassionate care and eating disorder recovery support. And I can say that both of those two things will never coincide with weight loss. And sometimes, I don't know if you experience this, but when you tell providers, you talk about eating disorders, they just don't know what to do. They just clam up. Exactly. They're just like, hands off. Okay, whatever you say, because they know it's problematic and prevalent. And so I was like, I literally, as soon as my doctor brought it up, I was disappointed. I was like, no. I was like, no. Like, why is this happening? And then I said, hold on. We are never going to be able to pull out facts and figures, but we can bring up eating disorder care. We walked through this. And so that was an actual fire. And so then afterwards, because I was prepared for the fire, I came out unscathed. It sucked, but I got myself out fully protected. Now, the next time I have to go to the doctor, we might be having a different conversation. But it starts with these things that are small. It starts with looking at the pictures. It starts with the exposures and building that trust with our body. And then it's bringing it into the world and to other people. And so if somebody is struggling with, if people are going to look at me and they're going to judge me because my body looks bigger, I would use the same skill set. And why does that hurt so much? There's a story there that's trying to protect you, but it's not actually protecting you. In fact, it's hurting you. It's preventing you from moving forward. So when we can deal with the story that's playing out, it allows the compassionate, value-aligned, champion, best friend, self-reparenting voice to advocate for you in the way you would advocate for anyone else.
So well said. Yeah, building that strong skill set. Along those lines, I'm wondering, like, how can we move from seriously disliking how our bodies look in a photo to no longer hating or being disgusted with the body we see or the human that we see in the photo ourselves? That's something you brought up in your email sequence. And I was like, oh, that's a good, how do we learn to do that?
And I don't remember what I wrote in the email sequence, but what I can tell
I think it was one of your prompts.
One of the things I can tell you is that I think that diet culture lies to us when it says you will get to change the body that you're in, and then you're going to love the skin you're in. And I learned this the hard way. For folks, just trigger warning, I'm going to talk about my experience with weight loss surgery. I remember my body changing and being like, when does that moment happen? When like my feelings change, when I'm going to feel confident and secure and sexy and all those things. And somebody else who had the surgery was like, oh, there's no surgery for that. And I remember being bummed. I was like, wait a second. Like, I know why I said I was doing this, but like, I feel lied to. And so the first thing I would do if I was encouraging somebody, how do we feel less disgusted by our body? I would say it's two things. One, I would encourage you to explore your internalized fat phobia. Everybody has internalized fat phobia. I have internalized fat phobia. It does not make you a bad person. It just is those deep rooted belief systems that's also generational trauma. Like this is epigenetics from our parents' generation. So as early as the 1600s, I recommend reading Sabrina String's book, Fearing the Black Body. She talks all about the epigenetics of body hatred. And that as early as the 16th century, white men were dictating what is attractive and what is not. I used to be afraid of fat bodies in the sense that I didn't think that they were attractive because it was my own. I was afraid my own body wasn't attractive. So what did I do? I took the Harvard bias test to see my own internalized fat phobia, which said I was moderately in favor of fat bodies. I, started following a lot of fat providers and fat influencers online who I was like, I think they're beautiful. I have no problem with their body. So what is it about mine? And then third is this piece of developing body trust of, can I become intimate, non-sexually, right? But with my own body, that I can view my body autonomously and not through the lens of diet culture. And so I'll use this example with my clients. I say, imagine you have a roommate that you don't really like. They disgust you. You don't really spend time with them. You don't really look at them. But the times that you are connected to them is usually when you're getting naked. So either when you're going to the doctor's, you're showering, or you're going to be intimate. That would be a very awkward relationship. That is the relationship many of us have with our bodies, is we pretend not to notice it until we have no option. And if that's the only time that you are paying attention to your body, that might be why you see your reflection and you're like, I didn't even know who that was. Or you see a picture of your old self and think, that's who I am, not this current self. There's a disconnection. And so the only way to heal disconnection is through connection. It's through spending time. It's through, healing that somatic experience, that you're not only spending time in your body when it's distressed. And there's a lot of caveats I want to put on that, especially if you've experienced any physical or sexual trauma. There could be a block. But once again, I would have you do that distress scale. And so maybe doing naked yoga is like a 10. Wouldn't do it. Maybe doing a boudoir shot is like a 10. Wouldn't do it. But maybe, I don't know, doing some yoga fully clothed and modified. It's like a 3 or a 4. Maybe, snuggling with some, little people, nieces and nephews who they don't care. Like they'll comment, but they're just like comfort. Cool. Awesome. And just seeing how your body responds then. It's about starting in a way that's tangible and building that awareness and not going straight for I'm going to do the sexy part of the work. I'm going to do the naked yoga, boudoir shot, all the things that are for the wow factor, as opposed to what am I capable of doing right now?
And then how do we take that the step further and say, as we're working on not feeling disgusted, feeling acceptance, feeling connected to our physical body, how do we, especially when that is still distressing, how do we still look at that body and recognize the human that's a part of that body is still worthy of respect, even though I'm working on the physical stuff.
Yeah.
But how does someone also then, when they see that body in the picture, not marry those two things together? If I don't like the body, I don't like the person. Or I don't like what I'm seeing about my body. Therefore, I'm sure other people aren't liking me as a person. Like, how do we separate that?
Great question. So I would say that's definitely that self-esteem work. And it really comes down to self-talk, that you'll have that critical voice, but you also have that self-parenting or reparenting voice. And some people don't like the term reparenting because they maybe have a strained relationship with their parents. That's the clinical term that we use, but you can call it your inner cheerleader or your, best friend voice, or, whatever feels comfortable to you. That it is acknowledging the story that comes up, but reminding yourself of who you are outside of your body. I like to use this example of, you can put me into I don't know what size, 32 ounce. I don't know what size the Starbucks tumblers are, right? You could put me in that cup, or you could put me into, this tiny little cat mug that I have over here. The content inside is going to remain the same. You're just changing the cup. And so if you can like whatever's in the cup, if you can say, yeah, you know what, regardless of what cup size it's in, I like what I'm drinking, it becomes easier to see and experience your own outward body experience, because the internal work is being worked on, is done. And so before I even have people focus on their bodies, I ask them, what do you like about you? Like, what, if you could give me 3 words to describe you, who are you? If you could give me your top 3 values, what's important to you? If I were to ask your best friend, your partner, your child to describe you, what would they say? That is who you are, not what size pants you are, not what size cup you exist in. It is the contents within that matters most. And I say that cautiously, because we used to say, right, like, people would always say, it's what's on the inside that counts or matters. And I was like, you don't say that to thin people. But it's the truth, and it is redefining beauty. Jess Baker talks a lot about this in her book, Things No One Tells Fat Girls. She says, the definition of beauty is, it's not changing, but it's just not as definitive. Like she said, a painting could be beautiful, just as the ocean or sunset. There's something about beauty that extends beyond prettiness, right? We wouldn't say a photo is pretty. And so remembering that external standard of beauty, that external, the Eurocentric standard of attractiveness, is defined by some, and that beauty truly is in the eye of the beholder. And I know that the more I have made peace with myself and who I am on the inside, the more I see what's on the inside of others before I notice or regard what's on the outside. And so my hope is to attract more people like that, and not people who are only going to be focused on the external beauty. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Oh, I love that cup analogy too, because it's so neutral, has nothing to do with bodies, but it has everything to do with size and everything to do with pleasure, satisfaction, enjoyment, connection, sensory. If you like what's in the cup. I think that's a great explanation. And it gives somebody something to think on before jumping into the picture part.
Yeah.
Which is more distressing.
I want to talk about this too, because I feel like it's a topic that probably needs way more attention that doesn't get enough. One of the biggest fears that I hear from folks whose bodies are changing, specifically women who are in straight heterosexual relationships, is the fear that if their body is changing, what if my partner is no longer attracted to this body? Like, that cup analogy is great, Brie, but what if my husband was attracted to me when I was the 32-ounce, tumbler, and that's not what I look like anymore. And so what I will say is I have counseled and coached both situations. I have coached the couple that has differing values when it comes to beauty, and I've coached and counseled folks who the partner does not care, but the person who was my client does care and believes that that partner cares. And what I've said to both audiences is, at the end of the day, the only thing that matters is, do you want to be in this relationship? If your partner is telling you, I'm in this, I want to be here in this relationship, everything else is moldable and work aroundable. Expectations can fall short in any relationship, platonic, romantic, whatever the case may be. And so even if your partner expected that, I don't know, you would age like a fine wine and instead you aged like a fine cheese, like, that is very much a reality that could happen. They have grown up in the same diet culture that we have. What I think is what people should be cautious of is, one, if that is a narrative that's going around in your head, the first thing I would do is I would talk to your partner about it. And if it doesn't feel safe to talk to your partner about it, I would recommend getting a counselor, a coach, or a third party to sit with you to have this vulnerable discussion, because unless you speak it out into existence, it's just going to continue to stay in that story. And then if you, like, let's say, I don't know, your partner turns you down for intimacy, then it's like, oh, it's because they're not attracted to me anymore, as opposed to maybe what actually happened. But that, as long as that tape is playing, unless we know for truth that that is the tape, we need to assess. And if it's the opposite, where your partner has communicated this, if we want to make sure it's a healthy relationship, because I don't want folks to be confused. If you are in any sort of verbally abusive relationship, then this does not count. This is not for somebody who's with a partner who puts you down or whatnot. But if your partner is struggling with their own internalized fat phobia, but still loves you, respects you, and is like just honest about, this is where I'm struggling, the two of you have to make the decision of, we're going to work on this together, or this isn't going to work anymore. And the couple that I'm thinking of that I worked with, they both wanted this relationship. They were both just struggling, her with healing from a no longer disordered body, and him, his own internalized fat phobia. But they both so desperately wanted to be still in this relationship. And so I said, maybe spend time focusing in on what attracts you to your partner. Maybe it started with initial physical attractiveness, but you're still attracted to each other. That's evident from this conversation. So let's continue to highlight the things that are attracted to each other now. And so I wanted to say that, because that is a fear that comes up for a lot of people, and probably should be a podcast episode of my own at some point. But I imagine that this is a fear that comes up for folks.
Oh, so much. And I've had a few other conversations with other guests along this lines too, of just this intertwining of body image and intimacy. And in the midlife season, it's a huge component of the work with body image. And we were talking a little bit before we pushed record on how body image work gets even a little bit more nuanced in midlife, because we have in some cases, significant body changes that seeming like are happening overnight to someone. We have hormonal changes that are affecting how the woman deals with stress, anxiety, and, to her partner, they may not understand really what's going on. They just see the outward, say, effects of those hormone imbalances. And when it's nobody's fault, but it does make this body image work even a little bit more nuanced. And because that weight gain and weight distribution are so common for women in midlife, I'm wondering what advice you would have for women in their 40s and 50s as they're watching this body change and shape shift. What advice would you give them, either as they're looking at pictures of their younger self or as they're looking at their current body in the mirror in this space of life, that would be supportive to help them move through this season and likely be embracing a new body, a new version of their body post menopause? What would you say to them?
I first, I just want to hold space for the grief, right, of not having control over your body anymore, or feeling, quote unquote, that you don't have control. Not that we really ever had control, but just making space for that. And if somebody were to be listening to this is really grieving their changing body, I would really go back to the thought trail exercise. And one of the questions that I would ask in that exercise is, what might you communicate to someone that you love? And this is something I have to do often, even just from the perspective of being in a non-disordered body anymore. And so for me, this is coming up a lot in movement, in that I can't move like I once did. And that grieves me. And that I always wanted my story to be that I was the fat, fit person. And that's not my story. That's not my story. And how would I talk to somebody else who was grieving their movement or their mobility? I would be kind. I would be gentle. I would be compassionate. And there wouldn't be a hint of critical judgment. And so I imagine that if you were talking to a friend or a loved one, or to me or to Amanda, you wouldn't be that way either. And so it is that radical acceptance piece of, I'm going to speak the way I would want to be spoken to. And I would remind myself of, yes, my body is bigger, that I've gained weight, but what else have I gained through this process? And does that, what I've gained, outweigh, no pun intended, what I've quote unquote lost? And there are going to be times where this doesn't land. And I'll give you an example. This will not land for somebody who maybe their body has changed because of a diagnosis. I know through our history together, we talked a little bit in our supervisions about somebody who has a diagnosis of cancer. There is a grief that you and I, unless we experience, can never understand, and will never make up for that loss. And so, that would be a different podcast episode, that we can definitely deep dive into. I really think it comes down to allowing yourself to be frustrated, acknowledging what is frustrating you the most, asking yourself, what do you need? And making sure that you're doing so with loving and compassionate kindness. And then if somebody is looking at a photo of their self, I was thinking about this the other day. It's almost like longing for a partner or relationship that's gone. If your body stayed the exact same as it did 20 years ago, 10 years ago, it wouldn't have meant that life hasn't changed for you. in the last 10 years. And so I think it's appropriate to miss that body. But if it becomes this instance where you are constantly comparing yourself to that younger version body, I might encourage you to ask yourself the question of what needs are not currently being met that maybe that younger photoed self provided. Whether it be, maybe you received a lot of attention when you were in that younger body. Maybe you were in a different phase of life and you were traveling a lot and now you're not. So maybe what you need to do is book yourself some travel and maybe it looks different than you once did. But you know, that grief is evident and that grief is real, and we don't want to minimize it by being like, but just be grateful for the body that you have. The gratitude is a natural response when it is autonomous, when you have given yourself the space to sit in the suck, but that you're not longing and pining for something that doesn't exist anymore.
I want to highlight that you said, you know, what in the face of gaining, say the gaining weight, what have you gained? What have you lost? And I think for many women in midlife, because we don't get this messaging from diet culture, is how protective that weight gain actually is, because the weight gain, particularly around the midsection, which is also a big no-no in diet culture, is that added fat tissue is going to mimic what estrogen was doing all these years as regards to bone health, cardiovascular health, all of this. And so we don't hear that messaging enough. It's all about like, no, you don't gain weight at any cost, and you got to stay in your smaller body. And at the same time, when someone is working to ignoring that, working to trusting and feeling into their natural midlife body, it's important for them to realize, not in a pacifying way, but just say like, hey, this is part of the transition also. Your body's doing this to literally save your ass when you're 80 and 90.
Right. Right.
So you might not like it now, but when you're late 70s, 80s, 90s, and you're not at risk of, or as strong of a risk of busting your hip, or breaking a rib when you hug your grandchildren or great grandchildren because you don't have such brittle bones, like that's an example of allowing your body to move forward in aging in a protective way. And yeah, that means gaining weight. And we don't get that messaging, kind of to what you were saying around the intimacy piece. We don't hear those conversations in that way. So Bri, is there any place you want to send people? Do you have any new programs coming up that you want to invite people to come find you on? Where would you like to send folks?
Oh, goodness. So no programs. We just finished. I don't know when this will air, but we just launched my final group for the body grievers for 2022. So you can always get on the wait list for the next course, which will be sometime in the new year. But we always have like drop-ins and low-cost things. So definitely follow me on Insta and you'll get all the goodies, and also on my email list, which I'll include you to. We'll have my newsletter. I try not to bombard people with emails because I know how overwhelmed I get. But when I send you stuff, I'm trying to make it good stuff. So it's like, yeah, I'll read that. I'll take the 2 minutes to read it.
Perfect. Well, we will put links in the show notes so that people can get on your email list. And to let listeners know also, there will be a free downloadable PDF guide to picture grief and some reflections that you can walk yourself through to help you process any picture grief that you might be having, looking at summertime photos or photos from your 20s. So Bri put that together in the email sequence, and I'll be doing a little cut and paste so that all of our listeners can get access to that too. So be sure to look for that in the show notes. And Bri, thank you so much, as always, for your time and sharing your wisdom. And as one of my clients recently shared who has worked with you too, like, you're totally a diamond in the rough. There's no one else doing this work like you are. And it makes a huge difference. And I think particularly for women in midlife, that body image piece is going to feel maybe the even bigger hurdle for some of them, and a continued practice. I always kind of leave it as like, it's not something that can't not be done, but it is a continued practice as your body continues to change. So I'm just going to reiterate to go and find Bree's work, and it will be an immense helpful tool for your continuing body changing journey. So thank you, Bree.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you. And for those kind words. I appreciate it so much.